The day should be the sunrise. It should be the beginning of great thought.
I wake up in the morning and I consciously create my day the way I want it to happen. Now, sometimes, because my mind is examining all the things that I need to get done, it takes me a little bit to settle down and get to the point of where I'm actually intentionally creating my day. But here's the thing, when I create my day, and out of nowhere, little things happen that are so unexplainable, I know that they are the process or the result of my creation. And the more I do that, the more I build a neural net in my brain that I accept that that's possible. It gives me the power and the incentive to do it the next day.
My existence is the best example of creating your own reality. Doesn't that make sense?
Tell us.
Well, growing up deaf, people have a different conception of how or who you should be. You're deaf, we should feel sorry for you. You need extra attention. You need extra schooling. You need extra care. You need to be looked after. Poor thing, she's deaf. And for myself, I looked at it in a normal way. I had and decided I would have a happy childhood.
And we all create our own realities. And we do that because we are the observer. We are each the own observer of our own reality. And each of our individual consciousnesses creates our own individual reality in the most amazing way. My son, Evan, the physicist, says, you know, it's an additive thing. I mean, if I'm holding one reality and someone else is holding another reality, I mean, it's the Super Bowl this afternoon. And the reality that the Eagles are holding is a different reality than what the Patriots are holding. And only one of those realities are going to be the real reality. So there's some additive, and there are interference patterns.
One of the things that comes up about creating realities is what happens when there are two people each creating a different reality. What goes on there? Well, the first thing to realize is that the idea that you create your own reality, if by you mean that egoic person that you think is running your show creates a reality, it's probably wrong. It's probably not that you that's creating the reality at all. The you that really is creating the reality is what I call the gooey in between the frame stuff. That's the true you.
The place from where we choose to create my own reality, that place of consciousness is a very special, non-ordinary state of being, where the subject-object split tends to disappear. The samadhi or satori that I was telling you about. And it is from this non-ordinary state that I choose. And therefore, the ordinary exaltation of the New Ager also disappeared until it was forced to face the reality that there is really no free lunch. We have to meditate and reach this non-ordinary states of consciousness before we become the creator of our own reality. That took a while, but now I think finally people are recognizing that there is no shortcut, but the cut is not that long either. It's not that hard. It's not that hard. We have been engaging in creativity for a very long time. We have created a great amount of art, music, even science, great amount of it. So there are many people who are experienced with creative process that eventually leads to this discontinuous leap towards this non-ordinary state of consciousness.
The connection between the quantum physicist and the ne'er-do-well on the street is that both of them have the power to create reality. One knows it, the other is ignorant of it. How does science disperse this good news to everyone and yet maintain the ethics of being scientifically absolute and provable time and time again?
If we keep quantum physics and the understanding very simple for the layperson, that our observation has a direct effect on our world. I think if we keep it very simple, then people can get about the business of beginning to practice the skill of observation.
Hey, wow! You got a lot of shots to develop?
No.
Oh, bummer. Well, I'll catch you later.
See, the subatomic world responds to our observation, but the average person loses their attention span every 6 to 10 seconds per minute. So that doesn't leave a lot of room for our attention span. So how can the very large respond to someone who doesn't have the ability to even focus and concentrate? Maybe we're just poor observers. Maybe we haven't mastered the skill of observation, and maybe it is a skill. And maybe we're so addicted to the external world and so addicted to the stimulus and response to the external world that the brain is beginning to work out of response instead of out of creation. If we're given the proper knowledge and the proper understanding and given the proper instruction, we should begin to see measurable feedback in our life. If you make the effort to sit down and design a new life, and you make it the most important thing, and you spend time every day feeding it like a gardener feeds a seed, you will produce fruit.
We are running the holodeck. We are collectively, it's there, it has such flexibility that anything you can imagine it will create. And you learn, I mean, your intention causes this thing to materialize once you're conscious enough.
Yes, so what is consciousness?
What is consciousness?
Well, consciousness is a very difficult thing to define.
The consciousness is the ground of being, therefore it is the one and the original. The chicken and the egg question, however, is very important. For example, how does this one consciousness become a subject-object split experience?
What is consciousness? Where does it come from?
What is consciousness?
People have been trying to explain consciousness and try to figure out what exactly it is, what it means for us as human beings, why we even have it. On a simple way of defining it is it has to do with awareness, and in particular it has to do with awareness of the self. That's at least how we as human beings have self-consciousness, so that when we look in a mirror we recognize that it's ourselves that we're looking at and not some other person or some other animal.
There's quantum coherence among proteins in the brain to give us the unitary nature of self, how we have only one sense of self in our brains, despite the fact that there are processes going on all over the place within the brain.
Well, I mean, I'm going to give you an answer that you're not going to be happy with. And I'm not happy with it either. I just don't know what more to say about it at the moment. There is one can use all kinds of other words: awareness, self-awareness, sentience, feelings, what people call qualia in philosophy. These just seem to me synonyms for it. They're not elucidating what's going on at the bottom of it. Let it suffice to say this. I'm putting myself back on the border again. The phenomenon of consciousness seems to me one of the points at which the collision between the scientific worldview and various anti-scientific worldviews are going to be the most acute. And it's exactly for this reason that I think it's an enormously important phenomenon to think about.
What is consciousness?
Yeah. Well, I define consciousness according to Penrose's view. It's a particular type of self-collapse of the wave function. Now, as you know, things can be in superposition of multiple possible states or locations. That's quantum superposition, and that's the natural state in the quantum world. Now, we don't see that in our classical world. Why not? Well, one explanation is that conscious observation causes collapse. That's the Copenhagen interpretation. Another is that every superposition branches off and forms a new universe, the multiple worlds hypothesis. Another is that interaction of superposition with the environment causes decoherence. And the fourth possibility is that superpositions grow until they meet some kind of natural threshold inherent in nature, which causes them to convert from the quantum superposition state to the classical state. There's several types of these theories which are called objective reduction, an objective threshold for quantum state reduction. One is if the system grows too large. That's the Girardi-Rimini-Weber GRW theory. Another is Roger Penrose's idea that, well, first he starts with a question, what is superposition? And he says it's a separation in fundamental reality at the most basic level. So much like the multiple worlds view, the universe separates and begins to separate, but that these separations, or bubbles, if you will, in reality, at the most basic level, are unstable, and after a while will collapse to one or the other. And that this type of collapse, this type of objective reduction that occurs due to this instability in the separation of the universe is consciousness. And it can only happen in very special circumstances because you need a system that's isolated from the environment, so it has to be protected, so it doesn't decohere, and it has to be large enough to reach this threshold. The threshold is given by, it's inversely related to the size of the superposition. So something very small, like an electron in superposition, if protected from decoherence, would take 10 million years to reach threshold, and then it would have a very dull, tiny moment of consciousness. Something very large will reach threshold quickly. And in the brain, we think that quantum computations occur which reach threshold roughly at 25 milliseconds. So 40 times a second, we have conscious moments, collapses, these self-collapses, in which the superpositions collapse to the classical world. And it's a process occurring at the most basic fundamental level of the universe, at the Planck scale, basically, connected to the brain by quantum computations occurring in our brains.
What is your simple definition of consciousness?
What is a simple definition of consciousness?
Wedding. A wedding. Come on, Frank.
This is a good assignment, if you'd see it that way.
What to see? I do. They did.
Oh, God, Amanda. I mean, you live in your past. I mean, everything with you is about what happened. You hate churches, you hate weddings, you hate guys.
Consciousness, we have great trouble defining it. To me, consciousness is a byproduct of spirit entering dense matter. But we have a long, long way to grow before we get to the stage where it is meaningful for us to ask the question, will we know God?
Most people think of God as that great figure in the sky with the white beard who's scrutinizing the human race from above. They see us here on earth as in some form of neutral testing ground, where we're placed by God for a period, and God watches from above, registering the scores on his laptop as to whether we perform according to his designs or whether we're offending him, as it's put. An absolutely outrageous idea. How could we offend God, the type of God that people believe in? How could it matter so much to him? How could it, above all, matter that he would find it so serious a situation that he could condemn us to an eternity of suffering? These are bizarre ideas, but obviously they have a great hold on the fears and the limitations and the insecurities of people, which is why religion can play so effectively, whether deliberately or otherwise, on those insecurities. People fall into line very readily when they're threatened by these cosmic sentences of everlasting punishment.
How in the Ten Commandments could we have possibly created a mind that could transcend space and time? No, we're too busy keeping our emotions in check to ever dream of infinite possibilities. And maybe that is the ultimate conspiracy.
Even though a given person may have long ago thrown off the trappings of religion, they still live in the religious mold, and they don't even know it, but their whole conception of how reality works is all something that has been molded by religion. So until you get that out of your system, you can't ever make a go of an evolutionary perspective. I mean, I had an incident once in Australia some years ago, and I was talking about the heaven and hell idea. And this young man of 20 years of age or so said to me, that was really interesting, but thank God, he said, thank God, I am not religious, he said. I said, is that so? And he said, yeah, I'm not religious. My parents had no belief, and I grew up without any beliefs at all. And he had told me the previous day that his father had died when he was 8 years old. So I said, do you mind me asking, where did they tell you your father went when he died? He said, well, they told me he went to heaven. I said, that sounds suspiciously like a religious view to me. And I went down through the 20 things or so, belief in right or wrong, retribution for good and bad deeds, etc. And on every single one of them, he passed with flying colors as a person with a profoundly religious outlook on reality. He was never in a church in his life, synagogue or mosque, but a perfect religious person.
Religion gets you off the hook of living it. It becomes, for example, religion does not have eminent domain over God. Religion is simply the study of God, the mystery of God, and then endeavoring to take from scraps of people all of that interpretation and put it in, well, it must mean this, and so we're going to fast today, and we're going to cover ourselves up, we're going to uncover ourselves up, and if we do this, this is what God is pleased about. But that's just hogwash. And so pleasing God gets us off of the hook of living. I mean, the very fact that we had to have somebody die for our sins is sort of a ripoff, don't you think? I mean, I think we already really should have had the privilege of living out our own sins and by virtue of experience be enriched with wisdom because of them. And I don't see how evolution and how we could ever grow and become astounding beings unless we are fraught with the blight of experience that is bad and harmful and all those things, because only then have we really achieved the wisdom that allows us to understand everybody.
One of the problems with organized religions is that there is this sense of separateness, that it's only good to be a Protestant, or that people who are Catholics are the only people who know the way. And I think now our current understanding of quantum physics is this understanding of complete unity, and so that we have to derive our spirituality from a sense of unity.
I use the pun fundamental with a hyphen to mean the fundamental level of the universe, because at the most basic level, there's a mentality at this most basic level. So, fundamental religions that focus on only their approach to the exclusion of others and are self-righteous and dogmatic, I think is a very bad thing.
The method in science is to produce a conjecture about reality, and then you set out hammer and tongs to disprove it. In that process, you will be able to strip away the accretions and the peripherals and hopefully get at a core that's hard and fast. And as somebody said yesterday here at the conference, 90% of new knowledge is going to the garbage bin in a few years anyway, and that's the way it ought to be. Now, the single exception to that in the field of human endeavor has been religion, because religion says, oh, we have all the truth already, right from day one, and therefore it can't ever change. Therefore, we can't set out to refute it. And because it has never set out to refute the peripheral aspects of its presuppositions, religion has become more and more irrelevant to the evolution of human thought.
Mustard seed. This parable is a brilliant parable to an age in which there was no science. So he says to his disciples that the kingdom of heaven is not in the sky. And look, many will say that it is here, it is there. But in reality, he said, all right, a mustard seed is the tiniest of seeds. The kingdom of heaven. And what does that mean? It means who we really are and where we have our eternalness. where we have our alwaysness, where we have always been and always will be, that self is smaller than a mustard seed, and that the kingdom to which God lives is as small. Jesus knew this 2,000 years ago. And how is he going to teach a bunch of fishermen, tax collectors, and riders on asses about quantum physics? And the key ingredient, the key to the kingdom of heaven is self. And where do we find self? In this morass of tiny, the observer. So, what did he know that you do not know? And he knew it 2,000 years ago. And so did the mystery schools 2,000 years ago know this. What are we really? We have determined it. What are we ultimately? We have determined it. That we are even smaller than the smallest phase of time from 0-point energy to its recognition. So how small are we? We are 0.0, and we fluctuate off of that 0.
So when we say the kingdom of heaven is within you, as Jesus put it, rather than God was within you, then we're talking about a complete identification of our being with the divine source that's at the origin of it all.
The only reason that there is an addiction to religion is some way out of a mistake. Does that diminish the greatness of God? No, it actually opens the corral and lets God be eternal, absolute. The law that is given to us is the same law as given to that of those people on Sirius. It's given to us by the people in the Rose universe or the I universe. You know, and your Hubble telescope has finally seen galaxies of immeasurable beauty. That in our heart and in our mind we long to engage. It's exciting to meet beings of greater mind or lesser mind. And where does it end? It doesn't end. It doesn't end.
We do not want to accept responsibility. We do not want to accept our greatness. So it's very easy for any system of thought, religious or otherwise, that comes along, it's very easy to play on that, to play on our insecurities, to assure us all is well, we'll all be taken care of. We lap that up. So don't blame religion. Blame our own insecurities, which has allowed religion to flourish, and which has allowed so many systems of thought that are disempowering to flourish throughout human history. That's why we can't get out of it.
I now present to you Mr. and Mrs. Richard Buck Filipowski.
Experiencing something in the present day that is a trigger to something that is very emotionally charged for us. So now we have become even more disconnected from the reality of what actually is.
The new dream, like a thunderstorm in our brain, and its electrical strikes through our synaptic skies to the earth of our being, creates a chemical cascade in our body that prepares our body for conquest, achievement, a relishing experience emotionally. But we would have no conquest. Indeed, we would have no relishment if we had not first had that hologram and those chemicals that made us, or rather changed us, from being fearful entities into fearless entities after a dream. The frontal lobe is the crowning achievement of the human brain. Frontal lobe. This frontal lobe allows us a distinguishedness to change our minds.
So it begs the question, what is free will? We really think that we have free will when we make choices. But there was an experiment done with people who had damage to the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is the area of the brain that we use to really make free will choices. And these people all had damage or strokes to their frontal lobe, and they put them in a situation where they said, this is a test, and there's no right or wrong answer, but you can choose whatever you want. Now, all the people who had damage to the frontal lobe could not choose. They could not choose one answer or the other. They could not make a choice. When they repeated the experiment and they said, now there's a right or wrong answer, the moment they said there's a right or wrong answer, these people were able to choose. So it has to cause us to begin to question if we ever really choose based on free will, or are we just choosing what we already know? And that free will means that we stop enough to be able to separate all the knowns and speculate possibilities and potentials that exist in the unknown. When we live by those automatic circuits that are already wired known patterns of association, we're really not making any free will choices. We're choosing based on what we know. And as long as we choose based on what we know, we'll always get what we know.
So at the level of the brain, you've got lots of neurons interacting locally. They produce a global intelligence that's associated with the brain as a whole. But then when you look at individual neurons, the interior of the neurons is a different physical implementation of the same principle. And in fact, at every scale, as you go down, like Chinese boxes nested the one in the other, each individual processing element at one scale can be shown to be composed of innumerable smaller processing elements within it. And ultimately, at the lowest level, the analogy is not going to be obvious, but mathematically it's rigorous. At the lowest level, the process whereby proteins fold obeys essentially the same mathematical self-organizing dynamic as how a neural network processes information. So the folding of a protein is mathematically identical to the generation of a thought, if you will, or the solving of a problem. Except that when you get down to that level, the process whereby these so-called neighbor-to-neighbor interactions take place is subtly different in incorporating quantum effects. And that's really where the notion of the quantum brain comes in. Not that the brain as a whole entity is a quantum entity, but rather that quantum effects at the lowest level are not only capable of, but of necessity are amplified upwards because of this nested Chinese box arrangement of the nervous system.
Consciousness enters this physiology and animates this physiology by essentially bubbling up through each individual cell and through the DNA within each cell. The DNA is a quantum mechanical entity, but it's a macromolecule. It's got one foot in the macroscopic classical world and the other foot deep in the quantum mechanical world. It's the bridge, if you wish, between quantum mechanics and matter. But having one foot in quantum mechanics, which is the world of thought, It basically transduces those impulses of thought into chemicals and into the chemistry, biochemistry, electrophysiology of thought.
Jeff's approach is that quantum randomness influences neurons at the level of microtubules. And I would say that it's more than that. I would say that quantum effects act in concert, coherently, more globally in the brain, that we may have macroscopic quantum states throughout large regions, if not the whole brain, that are basically identified with or influence consciousness. You go down a level of neural networks, then to neurons, and inside the neurons to the microtubules, which are acting as quantum computers. And then you look at the individual components of the microtubule, which is a protein which changes its shape like that. So on, off, yes, no, 1 or 0, however you want to make a computer analogy. And that is the bit, the fundamental bit inside neurons, inside cells that controls what's going on. Now that in turn is controlled by their little pockets inside the proteins in which electrons are free to roam. They're non-polar, so they're able to roam. And if they're in one position, say an electron here and here, the protein's open. If it's here and here, it's closed. So the movements of these individual electrons, which are governed by what are called van der Waals forces, control the state of the protein, which in turn computes in the microtubule, which in turn controls the neuron, which in turn leads to the brain functioning as a whole. Well, the electron movement of these van der Waals forces are also related to the quantum field and the zero-point energies in the quantum vacuum.
Through the workings of the nervous system and the particular way that it implements quantum effects. Very distinct, specific way, not general, not fuzzy, not imprecise. That it absolutely does open the door for free will being a possibility that does not violate modern scientific tenets, and that's consistent to a certain extent with people's subjective impression that we do have free will.
What separates us from all other species is the ratio of our frontal lobe to the rest of the brain. The frontal lobe is an area of the brain that's responsible for firm intention, for decision making, for regulating behavior, for inspiration. It is the seat of what causes us to take information from our environment and process it and store it in our brain to make decisions or choices that are different than the decisions and choices that we've made in the past.
Free will resides in our frontal cortex, and we can train ourselves to make more intelligent choices and to be conscious of the choices we're making.
Most people use very little bit of their frontal lobe, so most people already have a lobotomy, and most people don't really pay attention. So everybody has ADD. And the result of it is it's easier to use the already wired circuits and the stimulus and chemistry that's involved with using those automatic circuits than to stop those circuits and begin to look at possibilities and potentials. So the point is that when we're using those automatic programs that are already wired, they take place in the rest of the brain. And the frontal lobe gets to go to sleep. So even though we think we have the free will to choose, we don't really have free will. What we're doing is choosing what we already know. The brain is made up of tiny nerve cells called neurons. These neurons have tiny branches that reach out and connect to other neurons to form a neural net. Each place where they connect is integrated into a thought or a memory.
A neural net basically has to do with a group of neurons that are functioning together that have a particular type of function. People have looked at these in terms of what have been called cognitive modules, so that there may be neural nets, a group of nerve cells in either the same structure or across the brain that have certain functions that allow us to process information in a particular way.
Now, the brain builds up all its concepts by the law of associative memory. For example, ideas, thoughts, and feelings are all constructed and interconnected in this neural net, and all have a possible relationship with one another. The concept and the feeling of love, for instance, is stored in this vast neural net. But we build the concept of love from many other different ideas. Some people have love connected to disappointment. When they think about love, they experience the memory of pain, sorrow, anger, and even rage. Rage may be linked to hurt, which may be linked to a specific person, which then is connected back to love.
Every observation can be looked upon as a quantum measurement. This quantum measurement produces memory. We always perceive something after reflection in the mirror of memory. It is this reflection in the mirror of memory that gives us that sense of I-ness, who I am.
The brain does not know the difference between what it sees in its environment and what it remembers, because the same specific neural nets are then firing. We know physiologically that nerve cells that fire together wire together. If you practice something over and over again, those nerve cells have a long-term relationship. If you get angry on a daily basis, if you get frustrated on a daily basis, if you suffer on a daily basis, if you give reasons for the victimization in your life, you're rewiring and reintegrating that neural net on a daily basis, and that neural net now has a long-term relationship with all those other nerve cells called an identity. We also know that nerve cells that don't fire together no longer wire together. They lose their long-term relationship because every time we interrupt the thought process that produces a chemical response in the body, every time we interrupt it, those nerve cells that are connected to each other start breaking the long-term relationship. If we practice our mental rehearsal and our skill in being able to do it will show that certain brain circuits will grow as a result of our effort. It'll get easier to do, in other words. If we accept that idea, then it will allow us to go back the next day and do it with more certainty and with more acceptance. That in itself is no different than praying. You see, there's no religious text that says thought doesn't matter. There's no religious text that doesn't say your prayer and your intention shouldn't be answered by God. But explaining how that happens is what quantum physics and the observer is all about. But still, when we can make thought more real than anything else, our brain is designed to do that. The frontal lobe, with its enormous space, is the altar in which we place a thought. And it gives us the permission to hold a thought for an extended period of time, and it lowers the volume to the external stimuli. We lose track of time and space. That's